It's Song Talk Radio with Michael, Neil, Phil, and the gang.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Song Talk Radio. This, of course, is the show where we talk about songwriting and songwriting accessories. I'll be your host. I don't know why I'm talking like this, but I happen to be talking like this now. Along with the ride with me tonight is, of course, Mr. Neil Modi. How you doing, Neil?
I'm doing well. I think maybe you're talking like that. Is that a Newfoundland accent thing going on there? Are you picking up on that?
No, not quite. I haven't picked up. I don't think I have, but it'll be interesting to see how long that happens. And of course, Michael Franklin.
Good evening. Good evening. How is everyone? I'm doing quite well, thank you. Had a wonderful weekend. A busy day.
And Neil's making a point because I've moved out to the sunny Isles of St. John's, Newfoundland, in Canada, which is about as far east as you can get.
If you go to Cape Spear, it is literally the most easterly point in North America.
Which is not that far away, interestingly enough. But it's quite nice. So I'm just here waiting for the rest of my belongings to come here in a truck, which hopefully they will come. Or otherwise, I'm just a big, empty, poorly outfitted B&B. So Airbnb.
It's full of everything you could fit into a Mini.
That is true. Yeah. We packed everything up into a Mini and we drove across from Toronto to Newfoundland, and it took about 4 or 5 days. And surprisingly enough, had fantastic weather all the way through.
Yeah, you guys are really lucky.
Really lucky.
That nor'easter everyone was worried about must have just been nipping at your heels, but you didn't feel it. Yeah, very fortunate. I was worried about you.
That's true. Well, so, Song Talk listeners, if you're out in St. John's, Newfoundland, and you should come out because it's an amazing place to go, is look me up. Maybe we can have a beer. So tonight we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things, but I think, Neil, you had something you wanted to talk about first.
Yeah, so I was listening to Front Burner on CBC Radio, and they did an episode on called "Artists on Spotify Are Mad About More Than Joe Rogan," and they had Ben Cesario, a music industry reporter for the New York Times, break down a few things, and a couple of surprising things for me anyway were that. First off, Spotify maybe isn't entirely to blame in matters with a lot of artists are upset for more than Joe Rogan stuff going on. They're upset about the money that they don't make on Spotify. But I learned that Spotify, as many years as it's been around, is still not making any money themselves. They're always coming in with a deficiency, which was the case, which is still the case, I think, with Uber, still, was the case with Amazon for many years. All these companies that build up, they don't make any money, they don't make any profit.
I've also heard that they kind of do that so that they don't have to pay tax. So that any of the profit they make goes right back into R&D and operations, so they don't have to pay because it's not considered actual income. So
Right. But it was an interesting interview, only about 20 minutes long. But the guy also talked about Bandcamp and what they do differently and how they're not nearly as popular, of course. But of course, artists love Bandcamp, and as well what SoundCloud is doing a little bit differently in that SoundCloud is looking at something called user-based payments, so that, like on Spotify, for instance, if you never listen to Janet Jackson, for instance, and or Taylor Swift, for that matter. If you never listen to Taylor Swift, your $10 a month subscription the Taylor Swift gets paid out of that, even if you don't ever listen to her yourself. So SoundCloud, apparently, with their subscription, they're looking at user-based payments, so that the percentage of their whatever money they bring in that goes to the individual artists are based on how many users listen to them, and your money actually goes directly or mostly directly to the particular artist, which is kind of an interesting different kind of model than what everyone else is doing. But it was an interesting little interview. I think we'll put a link in the show notes to that show, because definitely recommend it.
Does now if if you have a Spotify account and you're on the free tier, you have to listen to advertising.
Yes.
But with SoundCloud, if you're on a free tier, there's no advertising, I don't believe.
I've heard some advertising on SoundCloud. They've started.
There?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
There is some. It's not as intense as on Spotify, but it is there. They're audio advertisements for sure.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, it seems like musicians are not getting paid well by Spotify.
No.
But,
or any streaming services, really. Apple or any of them.
Yeah.
Pandora, Tidal.
I'm also not sure about how that would compare to radio, if you got commercial radio. If as many people would be getting plays on radio, because radio, of course, is a much smaller pool of people who get played. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's easier to determine who got played on a radio station because there's a single stream, so to speak, that goes out, whereas Spotify, every listener listens to their own mix of music.
Station. Yeah, or their own playlist. But I mean, I'm assuming Spotify has all that data. I mean, why would they not?
Yeah, they do, and they could do something like this other thing where, your $14.95 or whatever Spotify costs gets divvied among the artists that you listen to, and not just all the artists on the platform.
Yeah, that's probably the best way of doing it. I mean, I have a SoundCloud page, but I don't know how many listens I get. Of course, I don't really push it very much, so.
No. Yeah, exactly. I have one too, but I don't do anything about it.
Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was getting an email from Spotify every month. You had 2 listeners this month.
No, I can't remember the last time I had listeners.
I was surprised. Neil Young was apparently now he wants everyone at Spotify to quit their jobs, which I didn't really think was a terribly realistic.
Is that really true? That sounds like non-information.
That's possible. I did see it on the internet, and as Abraham Lincoln once said, don't believe everything you've seen on the
That's true. He was a wise man.
Yeah. You knew how to look for
true.
And he said it in Morgan Freeman's voice, which was really neat.
That's true. So if you're out there in a podcast land, don't forget to send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca, or click that link and subscribe button on YouTube if you're YouTubing us, and let us know what you think about the whole SoundCloud thing and the whole Spotify situation. It's
and we also want them to take part in our Song Talk Challenge as well.
That's right. Why don't you tell us more about that, Mike?
Well, every year, Song Talk Radio does the Song Talk Songwriting Challenge, where we are given a set of parameters from which we 3 hosts have to write a song. And then we also invite our listeners to suffer under the same burden and send in what they've come up with. So the first year was write, a positive song using minor chords, right?
Positive lyric, yeah.
Yeah, positive lyric, minor chords. Last year, it was write a song that's just the same chord progression all the way through. And this year, it's write a song based on a title. And so we have solicited our listeners to send in title suggestions. And from that, we chose Why Do You Cry? And we're going to come up with a song each with the title Why Do You Cry? And we're inviting our listeners to do the same. We've already gotten some people sending in stuff, so I'm looking forward to that. So we will play ours in about a month or so. We 3 have a month to come up with something now.
Less than that now, like 3 weeks.
Yeah, something like that. We could change the deadline if we have to, I suppose. And then in March we will start featuring some of our listeners' songs, and see how they did. And I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard a couple of them so far, and they look really good and kind of putting mine to shame. Damn it. So get your songwriting caps on and take the title, Why Do You Cry? And write us a damn fine song and send it in, please.
Yeah. How's it coming along with you guys?
I'm going back to the drawing board to work out a different rhythm track.
Okay.
But I got the arrangement and the lyrics.
And the lyric
and the melody.
And melody's the same. Like, you're not changing anything there.
Yeah, I think that'll work. It's just, playing, wait a second, where did that extra half a beat come from? And that kind of throws things off when you're, yeah. Did I hesitate too long? Was I playing to the crowd? How about you, Phil? Have you did you hum a melody when you were driving?
So far, I don't have any lyrics. I don't have any melody. And I don't have any chords. But I do have a title. So I think
sounds like a hit.
Great. You made a great start there.
Give me a bouncy C.
Yeah, well.
Oh, you're going to make it big, kid. Really big.
So I'm hoping for, of course, the inspiration, or some people call it the last minute panic.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you're surrounded by a lot of salt air and inspiration. There's a lot of good musicians out east, so
there is. So I'm looking forward to
that. That should help. And how are you doing, Neil? You had something? How did you pull it apart? Is it up on blocks, or is it being polished?
It's being polished. I think when I shared it at the meetup last week, the weekend before was my panic time. I was like, let me get something done for the meetup and see what I can come up with. And to be honest, I'm relatively happy with what I came up with. I added a verse lyrically. I have to rearrange the song and figure out where it goes. And other than that, a couple of tips from the meetup that I want to try that I got. But by and large, I think I'm close to being done, at least the songwriting part of it, and then I'll have fun with some arrangement and additional tracks and stuff like that. It'll be kind of neat.
Awesome.
Can't wait to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, I
So
think
don't forget to
so.
send us your submissions at feedback@songtalk.ca, and don't forget to include your name and where you're from and all that good stuff, so we have some idea of who you are.
Yeah, and maybe even a little blurb on what the inspiration of the song was for you.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the process and what your thoughts were around that title and where you started with the title and ended up with a song. What happened in between?
Yeah.
Because this is a show where songwriters talk to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. So let us know your craft, your process.
Indeed. Right. So now we're going to talk about some of the songwriting accessories, and we're going to be talking tonight about music documentaries. So I have a question in general. So when we're talking music documentaries, I think there's two different kinds. There's the kinds that are wind up in film festivals and are sort of in a classic movie theater, and then there's other ones that are like they're just an hour, and there's lots of those on YouTube and Netflix and Amazon. So Michael, what's in your mind? What is a music documentary, and maybe what is it not?
Well, I mean, I think both are documentaries. They're nonfiction. They're not biopics, and they're about an artist. I think some of those might be it might be part of omnibus or a series, right? Because like the VH1 Behind the Music or Inside the Music or whatever. So, and there's a classic albums series where and I think those are like a documentary series. So I think what we were looking for tonight was to talk about one-off documentary films, and a lot of the ones that you see on. More on Amazon Prime. There's a lot on Amazon Prime, a variety of quality. And Netflix has some, but not a lot. But they have a lot of series of documentaries. So, but then there are others which, play in film festivals and used to be released to be in cinemas and would play at film festivals. I don't know, very many films nowadays, because of COVID, they don't get released in movie theaters at all. Only a few big ones.
The other way to divide them into groups maybe is authorized or not authorized, because you mentioned one a few episodes back, Mike. I feel it was a Smiths one or something like that, where they didn't have they didn't have license to use any of the Smiths' music.
Oh, that
Yeah.
was, that was
obviously an unauthorized documentary.
That was kind of more of a biopic, I think, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Well,
was it a
there's been a couple of biopics out. Yeah, on the Smiths, there was a David Bowie one that didn't, or I don't know if it ever came out, but yeah, didn't have the rights to his music. Well, I mean, there are good unauthorized biographies and there are dreadful authorized biographies, which are just basically, hagiographies, or however you say that, where they're just, this group were great. Here's how they were great in the 60s, how they were great in the 70s. So, that's more an approach. But if the idea is that you're taking a factual look at a band, and ideally you will have permission so you can hear some of the music, and ideally you would have people talking about the band who actually knew the band. But there are some out there that are interesting, and it's just a bunch of talking heads of people who knew of the band or something. So, it's still a documentary. It just may not be a good one. So hopefully tonight we'll be talking about good ones, and we'll tell you why we think they're good, and we'll direct you to, where you might see these.
So one thing that most of our listeners may not be aware of is that Michael actually was a professional director for most of his adult life.
That's true. And I have directed a bunch of documentaries too.
So you actually know of what you speak. So I want to ask you something, because
I wouldn't say that.
Don't go that
far. So I've often gone to music documentaries and I've enjoyed them. But so often I've thought this would have been better 20 minutes shorter. And there's an actual good reason for that, I think.
There's a couple of reasons for that, and it applies to dramas as well. It's not just documentaries, but sometimes, it depends. If you see them in the cinema, it needs to be a certain length to be considered a film.
And how long
whereas, I think it has to be over an hour long, though it depends on the film festivals. But often documentaries are funded by television channels, and they have to fit neatly into an hour or a bit less, depending on whether or not that channel has commercials. So you can, depending on where you see a documentary, you might see a different version of it. If you see it in the cinemas, you'll see a longer version. If you see it on PBS, you will see a short version because they have a lot of breaks, I think they put the breaks at the end of the film. But if you see it on a commercial channel, then you'll have commercials in it, so you'll see even less of it. So it depends, and that's why I think that the streaming services now, your Netflix and your Craves are pretty good, because you at least aren't interrupted. And if they buy a film or commission a film, then it will be the same that you would see if it ever had a theatrical play. For example, I can't remember, but coming up in the middle of February, there's an Oscar Peterson film done by a director named Barry Average, and he's done some other really good documentaries. So I'm really looking forward to that. Oscar Peterson's a fantastic musician, and it looked like they had a lot of big name jazz musicians and people who really know of what they speak, talking about his life and his influence.
I got a question for you guys. Do you seek out music documentaries about bands or artists that you're already a fan of, or do you seek out ones that you heard of the artist but aren't really familiar with them, but maybe want to learn some more? Like, I'm curious to watch the Oscar Peterson one, even though I don't know that much about Oscar Peterson's music. I know a little bit, but not very much. But I'm still curious to watch it. Where do you guys fall on that?
It depends on the artist. Like, I was a late comer to Southern rock, and I watched her. There was one, I think, on Amazon about Lynyrd Skynyrd, and it was terrific, And, it wasn't a band that I was particularly familiar with, but, I used it to learn by. On the other hand, there's a very well-known documentary that came out a couple of years ago, like 10 or more years ago, called Some Kind of Monster, which was about Metallica recording an album and, going through therapy and having all kinds of troubles. And it was an acclaimed documentary, and I didn't care, because I didn't want to be in a cinema or in a space where I had to listen to that much Metallica. So,
Yeah. Okay.
so it depends. It depends on the artist. I do like watching documentaries about. I will seek out a documentary about an artist that I know and like, but if the documentary isn't good, I'll bail.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the quality of the film as much as it is the quality of the artist, I think.
I think, as with most people, I think, you are attracted to people that you know and like because you're interested in them. Although I'm often if documentary is about a form of music or a music scene, I find that kind of fascinating because there's a lot of sociology in that kind and historical information, and that is something I am kind of interested in. So that's sort of an advantage with that. Thinking of one of the ones called "The Decline and Fall of Western Civilization."
Yeah.
Which is about the first one's about the punk scene, and then there's another one.
Second one about the metal years.
The metal years, and that's kind of fascinating because the whole sort of punk scene is something I was very interested in.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, you can do that. You can seek out, and that's what's great now with all these streaming channels. There's so many of them. You can there's probably easily 10 just about punk bands and 10 about Southern rock bands. But sometimes you start watching them and you go, oh, this isn't going to be good. I was watching an Aerosmith one, and I was a huge Aerosmith fan growing up. And all the songs, all the footage came from one concert. So they must have just licensed one concert. Then so everything they were saying about the band kind of had to be shoehorned into whatever songs that they had licensed. So even if this wasn't a particularly, important song for the band, somehow it was in this documentary because that's the only songs they licensed.
So as a documentary filmmaker yourself, do you have a tendency to be either A, very harsh on documentaries because you know exactly what they should have done, or are you or B, more forgiving of documentaries because you know how hard it could be?
Definitely harsher. I would say. Well, but I think it's just being a film goer as much as anything. Like if it's a good film, it's a good film, and if it's not, it's not. I don't think my background. The only thing my background does is enable me, perhaps to be sympathetic, but I might know why they're having trouble, but that doesn't make the film better. It doesn't make me enjoy it more. There are documentaries out there that somehow want to tell the story of a band without having any of the music in it. I don't subscribe to that being. I've yet to see one that really works like that.
Yeah.
And similarly, you can have documentaries where everybody's cooperating, and at a certain point, you realize this could have been released by the band.
Yeah.
There's a Billie Eilish documentary that I think they're talking about might even be nominated for an Oscar. I know the Oscar nominations came out, so I don't know if it has been yet. But it was paid for by Interscope, her record label. So, the documentary filmmaker was a very well-known documentarian. So, and the reviews of it are quite good. But you do wonder how much of an impartial film it's going to be when it's funded by the record company.
That's a good point, actually.
But the things to look for in documentaries, first, is access. You want the documentary, the filmmaker to have access to the subject, and ideally that something of significance happened over the course of the film. Now, that's not necessary, because sometimes just being around a person and if they're an interesting enough person, that'll do it. But having access. So if you're watching a documentary and it doesn't seem like they have access, there's a lot of experts and talking heads, but no actual, unique footage or, entry into this story. You kind of wonder, why is this person telling this story? And why is it any more special than someone else telling the same story?
That's an interesting point, because one of the ones I'm going to be talking about is one called Beware
let's start.
Mr. Baker. Yes. Beware.
Let's start.
Well, why not? It's called Beware Mr. Baker, and it's about Ginger Baker and the fact that he is, and I think the medical term is crazy as a bag of hammers. And
this is the film. It starts with him hitting the filmmaker, right? Smacking the camera.
Oh, really?
And well, I mean, like he's also had one hell of a life full of lots of abuse of himself with alcohol and drugs and touring, and it was definitely a fascinating documentary, which again I did feel was about 15 minutes too long, but to just sort of see him, he's just always on the edge of just kind of like losing it, not because he's a bad person, but I think he's just, he has some challenges, and he actually does attack the cameraman at one point. So I thought that was an interesting. Interesting.
What else did you enjoy about the film? I've seen it too, and it is a good document about this guy. You get a good sense of him.
Well, it's like Ginger Baker. I kind of knew of him more than about him, because I knew that he was part of Cream and all that stuff, but I didn't really know. And I've heard the name thrown about, so I didn't really know kind of what he was and what his deal was, and how talented he actually was. And he was a very fine drummer and a very and very much an artist, I think, in the true sense of the word, where he was, always exploring and always, trying to explore his craft. So because I knew so little about him, it was very fascinating getting an idea of like who this guy was, and that he was in a band with Eric Clapton and these huge icons of the rock and roll world.
Yeah, kind of one of the first super groups. I think Cream was considered, right?
Yeah, and again, not a music that I totally love, but still, you have to really respect what they did, and it was just a fascinating journey for me getting to know someone I didn't really know that much about, but sort of knew of, which is sort of an interesting. In a modern culture, you can sort of know of someone, but not know kind of much about them, which is a weird way.
And the film is good because it does have access. He does, despite occasionally hating the interviewer or the filmmaker, he does give him, they spend a lot of time together, and you do get a sense of who the man is. So I found it really interesting
and
for that reason.
And he doesn't pull a lot of punches. I mean, I thought he was pretty honest all the way through, the good and the bad and the ugly. He was, he just sort of put it out there, and I respect that because, I wouldn't do that. So, So that was be my first.
And what's it called again?
Beware of Mr. Baker.
All right. I endorse that too. Neil, what do you have?
So the first one that came to my mind was one I saw rather recently on Netflix, and it's We Are Twisted Effing Sister, which is of course about the band Twisted Sister. And I'll be honest, this was one of the ones that I'm like, I'm not a big Twisted Sister fan. I know they're big hits from the, We're Not Gonna Take It and all that stuff from the 80s, but I don't know much about them, but I just happened to hit it, and it was remarkably compelling. Just because I think, they kind of started out in the kind of New York punk era sort of thing, but they took their inspiration from David Bowie and his kind of stage presence and the way that he appeared on stage, and thought, well, what if we, start putting on makeup and dressing like women, but to them it was just like it was like an act. It was like they were just putting on, a fun show. It wasn't anything deeper than that. And there's a lot of stuff in there about them. The guitarist JJ, who actually started Twisted Sister, and going through a few different players, and at one point they're being like, yeah, we were okay, but the drummer was not that good, so we kicked him out. and then they got somebody else, and they kept on recycling through people, and then finally came upon Dee Snider as the lead vocalist, and that kind of pulled everything together. But it was interesting to me how much for on the face of it, you think Twisted Sister's about the kind of the act that they put up on stage and the glam and all that sort of stuff, but they were actually really, really concerned about being good musicians and writing good songs. And I'll be honest, most of the songs they played in the documentary, I don't remember. I don't. They weren't all that great, and I'm like, if you guys think they're great, go for it. It was interesting to me how much they actually focused on the music, despite. They talked about shows where the fans just got completely crazy and like tore the bar apart or whatever, and all that sort of stuff. But they still somehow managed to focus on the music. The other reason I think I was interested in watching it too was I had seen a clip. It was either on YouTube or maybe it was in the movie Bowling for Columbine, where Dee Snider was testifying at that in 1985. The parents resource council, something that this is when they started putting explicit lyrics warnings on CDs and tapes and everything like that, and it's even goes to streaming, they put explicit on the songs or whatever, and how articulate and intelligent Dee Snider spoke about his life as an artist, and how they're just putting together a bunch of fun rock and roll songs, and swearing never hurt anybody, all that sort of stuff, right? And the surprising thing, of course, is that he showed up to the court hearing, in his not quite the full Twisted Sister thing, but in
his stage getup, because Frank Zappa was there and wore a suit.
Yeah, Frank Zappa was there and wore a suit, right? He's trying to look all upstanding and everything. Dee Snider came in with the hair and everything else, and just but was the most articulate, put together his argument really clearly, and was just like. So at that point, I'm just like, okay, these guys are pretty smart guys. Like maybe there's something to their story that is actually kind of compelling. And you're right, Phil. This one runs like over 2 hours. It is quite long, considering all the stuff they go through. So yeah, probably could be trimmed up a bit, but overall a fun thing to watch.
And I'm always impressed by anyone who can make a good living in the music industry. I mean, you might not love their music, but if they achieve it, that's not easy for anyone.
Exactly. If you're making a living at it, props to you, even if it's.
No, I totally respect them. I'm not a big fan, but I respect.
Yeah. How about you, Michael? What's your,
Well, I'll lead off with one that's a bit more obscure, and then the other two that I want to talk about are quite easy to find, and you probably heard of. There's a documentary called Dig, which is primarily about the Dandy Warhols and the Brian Jonestown Massacre. And it's kind of neither of them at the time when the documentary begins are big stars at all, or a successful band. Really, I think it's Oregon or somewhere where they're the local bands, and it just follows the two of them as one of the bands disintegrates and the other becomes quite successful. And it's a really an in the trenches look, and it has great access. I think the filmmaker had followed the Brian Jonestown Massacre, and especially the lead singer, for about 8 years. They had tons of footage to come from, and it's about the minor ups and downs, and some major ups and downs as well. But it's a really interesting look at gigging bands and the things that can break a band and the things that can make a band. So I don't know where you'd find that, but I'd look out for a documentary called Dig.
Where did you see it? When you saw it in theater?
I bought it. I have it on DVD. Okay. I think it played film festivals. I think it won the documentary. It won some award at Sundance. Hang on. Dig. Here we go. It won the documentary Grand Jury Prize at the 2004 Sundance Film Festival, and it has been acquired by the Museum of Modern Art for its permanent collection.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And it was directed by a woman named Andi Timoner, and she is the only person to have ever won, let me see, what does it say? She's the only two-time recipient of the Sundance Film Festival's Grand Jury Prize. So... her other documentary was not a music documentary though. But I haven't seen it on any of the streaming channels, but it's worth searching out. It's called Dig, and it's about the Dandy Warhols and the Brian Jonestown Massacre.
Incidentally, when I went looking for We Are Twisted Effing Sister on Netflix, it's no longer on Netflix, but I did find it, if you're in Toronto anyway, on the Toronto Public Library has their online on-demand Hoopla system or whatever. And if you just log in with your library card, boom, you can watch it there.
Is it geo-blocked? You can only get it if you're in Toronto. I guess only if you have a
You have to have a
library
Toronto
card.
Public library card.
Right.
However, I believe you can pay for them. I've heard you're actually able to pay for a library card to the Toronto Public Library because it's actually considered to be apparently one of the best in the world.
Yeah, it's a really well-maintained library.
It is.
Yeah, we've got lots of.
And so then you can watch it all the way in Newfoundland, which also has a pretty good public library.
Yes, which I haven't been there.
All right, what's next for you, Phil? What
So the next for me
what
is,
doc could you recommend?
Searching for Sugarman, a 2012 documentary film, and it's about a South African cultural phenomenon. And it tells, it's about these two fans from Cape Town trying to find out information about this sort of folky kind of Bob
Well, he was
Dylan.
like the Bob Dylan of South
Yeah.
Africa. He's not from South Africa, but he was a huge
South Africa.
South Africa.
Yeah.
He's got famous there, yeah.
His name's Sixto Rodriguez. And apparently there's rumor that he died and all that stuff, and they were trying to sort of find out the information about who this person was, and it was fascinating again about an artist I'd never heard about. He was eventually, they found him, I think eventually he was working, I think, in construction in, some U.S. city or something like that.
Detroit, I think he was.
Detroit.
Right? Yeah.
And, he was, just a huge phenomenon in South Africa. One of the things that was really interesting is that there's a bit of criticism about the movie because actually he wasn't actually just someone who was forgotten. He was actually quite famous and quite successful in Australia. So a lot of people saw this and said, well, what are you talking about? He was big in Australia and toured in the 70s, like in 79 and 81. So people are saying,
He toured the Far East as well. Like he was a working musician. He just wasn't famous in the U.S., right?
But the thing they didn't realize is that because South Africa was under the apartheid system, and of course all the information was censored by the government. So to young kids in South Africa, this guy just disappeared, and that's why these two guys from Cape Town, to them, it was just like, oh, this guy disappeared. Whatever happened to him? And he was actually somewhat. So it's got to be. There's an interesting sort of dynamic because I'm not sure how thrilled Mr. Rodriguez was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an example of one that's kind of seems unauthorized.
Yeah, he got a late career boost. He was on the
did.
David Letterman show and a bunch. So he got, but the movie was kind of ambivalent whether or not he wanted that attention.
Yeah. But it was certainly a very talked about film when it came out in Toronto. I don't know if you had anyone else had seen it.
I think it did well. Like it won a lot of documentary awards. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary.
There you go.
And and a BAFTA award also for Best Documentary. So it was the big documentary of the year whenever it came out in 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
And but it was a movie that sort of didn't have access because they really had, but they were searching for him. So the lack of access was sort of part of the story.
That's really what made the story compelling.
Yeah. And the fact that he was sort of, kind of really well known in some places and not known at all in other places. And it's a fascinating thing for people who want to write songs and, kind of what they have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he was the dude who played with his back to the audience, wasn't he?
Was he?
So did Van Morrison.
That's true.
Oh, I didn't know that actually. Okay.
So Neil, which one is
one of the dudes?
Yeah, exactly. And how could you tell if you just see his back? It could have been anyone.
It could have been anyone.
So Neil, what's yours?
So my next pick is a documentary from a band that I've been a longtime fan of. It's Rush Beyond the Lighted Stage, directed by Sam Dunn and Scott McFadden. Came out in 2010, and this, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first sort of feature-length documentary about the band Rush, and they really just take it right from the beginnings of when Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson met in high school. And take it right through up until the 2000s. And what you were saying before, Mike, about access. So Sam Dunn, the director, one of the directors, was apparently like a really super uber fan, right? So he knew everything about the band, and he gained really good access to them. He spent a lot of time with them. You can almost feel the love that the director has for the band, because there's not a lot of and Rush is the kind of band. I mean, they start out in the first little bit, and Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee are driving around with the director in a car in Willowdale, in the north end of Toronto, which this is where they met. This is where they grew up. They're a suburban band. They're not an inner city, rock band or whatever. They're very much a Middletown suburban kind of a thing. Which I've until very recently I was living in that neighborhood for like 7 years, and I grew up in Thornhill, and I always passing through that Willowdale area, and they're driving around. I'm like, I know this place, and they're talking about how much it changed over the years. Yeah, exactly. So we all have a connection to that sort of thing, and it's like, and you see the camaraderie and the friendship between the three of them, and it really just it does have a little bit of a really feel good thing to it, because again, like Rush is not the kind of band that there was a lot of inner fighting. They just got along with each other for 50 years. And
I don't think they ever fell into like doing a lot of drug use or any partying. I think they always had.
No, nothing like that. So they focused a lot on the music, and had a lot of clips from concerts and from videos and stuff. And of course, the toughest part of the movie was when they got to Neil Peart and the loss of his daughter and his wife within a year, I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s, and his kind of trek where he went on a 50,000 kilometer motorcycle journey, wrote a book around it and all this thing like that. So that was the kind of the emotional low point, if you want, the most dramatic point of the whole documentary. But then it ends, of course, with the band coming back together after a few years and their resurgence. So I mean, if you don't know anything about Rush, it's a great place to start. And if you do even know a little bit, then there's a lot of good material there, and a lot of the DVD has got a lot of extras too. Like you can watch like a 2-hour long dinner with them.
It won the Juno Award for DVD of the Year.
Yeah. Oh, did it?
Wow,
okay, there you go.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
Of course.
Yeah. Sam Dunn. It's Banger Films, and he's done.
Yes.
He's a really good documentary, and his film company Banger Films has done a lot of great documentaries. They've got a new one coming up on Triumph. They did one on Alice Cooper, Super Duper Alice Cooper. They did the ZZ Top one anyway, and they did a series on hip hop evolution.
Yes.
So if you see Sam Dunn or Banger Films, it's the quality will be assured. He makes good films.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so Michael, what's your next one?
I came across this. I didn't even know it existed. And Peter Bogdanovich, who's an Academy Award-winning film director, he did The Last Picture Show and What's Up Doc and a lot of other well-known movies, directed a 4-hour documentary on Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And I watched it, and talk about it being too long. It actually didn't seem too long. It's a really interesting documentary on Tom Petty and his songwriting process. Also the band, the Heartbreakers, who were his friends, all from Gainesville, Florida. Is that where Gainesville is? So it's their journey, the rise and not really the fall, because Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Tom Petty in particular, stayed successful for most of his life as a musician. But what's really interesting about this film, aside from documenting and the access he has to Tom Petty and his band, and a lot of people who have worked with him, was it also sort of even though it's a long film, it doesn't feel drawn out. It's just leisurely, and it talks about stardom. It talks about how a band works together. It talks about how you know, at that stage in a band's career when the lead engine wants to try something different. How does the band handle that? And it talks about, you know, when you have to let someone go who's not good. So it's about a lot of bands in a way, but it's, you know, done through the prism of this one band. And Peter Bogdanovich has done a lot of documentaries as well, and he's a really good filmmaker. So there's something nice about being in the hands of a filmmaker who knows what he's doing. And I would really recommend this, and I think it's on one of the streaming services. So it's called Runnin' Down a Dream. Not running down a dream.
Runnin' with apostrophe, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just a really engaging documentary. And I think even if you're not a big Tom Petty fan, he's an interesting person. And there's just enough going on in this that it's a documentary about rock and roll in a way. And the relationship between a band members and also between the fans. I'd highly recommend that.
Very cool.
Nice.
Do you have any more, Phil?
I do. It's Standing in the Shadows of Motown.
Oh,
and
yeah.
of course, this is about the Funk Brothers. And the Funk Brothers were this backing band that basically worked for Motown, and there were a bunch of jazzers and session guys, and basically they would be in this room all day and just do these backing tracks for songs like, Love is a Heat Wave, You Really Got a Hold on Me, Bernadette, Reach Out, I'll Be There, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, You Keep Me Hanging On, What's Going On, with Chaka Khan. The Funk Brothers produced more hits than the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, and Elvis Presley combined.
Wow.
And yeah, I think they even did Mr. Tambourine Man. They're the ones who actually played on the back in Mr. Tambourine Man. And I think, this was all from sheet music too. Most of them did from sheet music. And I think you would usually do it in between 1 and 2 takes, sometimes 3, but usually 1 or 2 takes. And of course, they could do this because that's all they did all day, was just sit in this room, and people would bring in these songs. And of course, Motown was like this factory where they had, I think it was like 10 pairs of writers working every week, and they'd have to write so many songs. They'd get together and they'd present the songs, they'd be narrowed down, and they'd be doing demos, and those demos would be chosen. And it was an ongoing factory where they were just churning out content like you wouldn't believe. And it's fascinating to see these guys who are actually jazzers playing all this pop stuff. And after they were done working in the studio, they'd go out and play jazz gigs.
Now let's go play some real music.
And it has some stuff about the legendary bassist James Jamerson.
Yeah,
who's an amazing bass player. And one of the great things is he has a soloed track of his bass on Bernadette, which is wonderful.
Very cool.
Also,
and do you know where we could see this?
I do not. But
I remember seeing it on the Movie Network, or if that's what it's still called. I think that's now Crave.
Yeah, it might still be on Crave. Well worth it. It won the 2003 Grammy Award, Best Traditional R&B Vocal Performance, Best Compilation Soundtrack, Maryland Film Festival, Austin Film Festival, Audience Award, Best Documentary Showcase Film, New York Film Critics Circle, Best Nonfiction Film in 2002, and a 2002 National Society of Film Critics Best Nonfiction Film. So just fascinating, and to see what these people did. I mean, they just made this magic happen, and apparently the Yardbirds were pissed off that when they did, the backing group for Mr. Tambourine Man, but then when they saw them in action, they were saying they couldn't do that because they basically did it in like 1 or 2 takes. So you get this whole band together, and they just lay down the stuff, and they were doing like 5, 6 songs a day.
It's like an assembly line.
Yes.
Yet it made amazing music.
And it did, and the stuff still sounds amazing. So
really, really clever and inventive arrangements.
Yeah.
So you might wonder, audience, why are we going so far afield? Isn't this about songwriting? But within these movies are some wonderful lessons and inspiration for songwriting, and this is a case in point that you see how they can take what seems effortless and simple, and you realize how much it makes the songs and makes them last forever.
You can watch Standing on the Shadows of Motown on Prime, Amazon Prime.
Oh, good.
Okay, there we go. Seems like a lot of these are on Amazon Prime. All right.
Cool, Amazon. All right.
So if Amazon Prime wanted to sponsor Song Talk Radio, I think we could talk.
Have your people call our people. We'll just have to get people. So
Yeah. Hang on while we get some people.
So Neil, what's your next one?
So for the next one, I did pick a series, The History of Rock and Roll, which came out in the 90s. I think it was on A&E, on the A&E channel or something like that. It's 10 episodes, 1 hour each, so 10 hours worth of content, and it starts from the 50s and goes right through the 90s. The one on the 70s is called "Have a Great Decade," and the British invasion and the punk and the new wave and the grunge and the whole gambit, and a lot of interviews with a lot of famous people, which is always fun to see. So a lot of it is talking heads and a bunch of archival footage and concert footage and things like that. But as a quite a comprehensive overview of rock and roll over the decades, I haven't seen anything quite as kind of all encompassing as this series. I found it at the Toronto Public Library. I just happened to browsing through the DVDs. I'm like, this sounds interesting, and then you borrow them one at a time, 10 DVDs, and good to go.
That's good. I think the lesson here is get a library card.
Yeah.
And how about you, Michael?
Well, I would save the best for last. I think this is just a fantastic documentary, and a lot of people have been talking about it. It's the Peter Jackson recut of the Beatles documentary, Get Back. And the original director, Michael Lindsay Hogg, made a different film that was a lot of people didn't like, including the Beatles, because it was about the Beatles breaking up, which it turns out, watching Get Back, which is a lot longer, it's 3 parts on Disney Plus, which you can get for free for a month, and it's worth it to check this out. But it is basically, it feels like it's every day of the time the Beatles got back together to record the album that became Abbey Road, was it? Or is it the other one?
Let It Be.
Remember. Let It Be. Let It Be. And it's just fascinating to be a fly in the wall, and there is some interpersonal dramas, but it is also, you're in the hands of a good director, so it's been put together. In this case, you're in the hands of a good editor. There's a flow, and it builds, and when it finally pays off at the end with them playing on the freezing cold rooftop, it's fantastic. And you really get a sense of the personalities of the Beatles and how they worked together and how they kind of had stopped working together, and how some people had outgrown the group and some people were trying their best to keep it together. And it's, definitely, if you're a Beatles fan, you have to watch it. But I think it's just in terms of, if you are a fan of music and how music is made, you see some classic Beatles songs written before your very eyes. It's jaw-dropping. You need patience because it is watching people wait for inspiration to come. And you can hear some songs over and over again. But I've watched this series twice now. It's a series of, I think, 4 hour long or something. But it goes by, the second time it went by way quicker. And it's just fascinating. So it's one of the best rock documentaries ever made, I would say.
It's interesting because I think even Paul McCartney said that, like his memory of the time before seeing this recut is that it was negative and it was dark and it was upsetting and and depressing. And he says, now when he sees it, he goes, no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And it's because he saw, of course, the first version, which was all the breakup. And
which came out after he'd broken up and was suing his bandmates and was in a very bad state of mind too, I imagine.
But it's interesting how even when we experience something, those memories can be tainted by external influences.
Yeah,
because you think, oh, well, I was there, I know exactly how I felt. But now he watches it and he just goes, well, it wasn't that bad actually. So,
no. And that was the deal. Peter Jackson had been hired to put together sort of a promotional piece for a touring Beatles exhibit, I think is what it was. And he saw this footage from the original documentary and said, can I take a look at that? But he had said, I'm going to screen it all, but if it's going to be a sad film, I'm not going to put it together. That's the deal he made. I only want to do something that's, a bit more positive. And he was able to find that. And yeah, it's a terrific documentary in a number of ways. And talk about access. That's all this film is, complete access. And kudos to the original director because it's beautifully shot. And, he put together a bad film perhaps, in the original, or at least a negative film, but the footage he did capture is just, and then put together by Peter Jackson and his team, all cleaned up and sounds great. It's just a wonderful experience. So it's worth Disney Plus for free anyway.
Certainly an example of the power of the editing process.
Very much so. And he said he was not going to use any shots that were in the original film. So it's all new shots.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, wow.
There was so much footage.
There's probably a bunch more stuff still left on the cutting room floor.
I imagine there is. Yeah.
Wow.
I haven't had a chance to see it because we don't have anything.
We have nothing.
You can see that Phil is broadcasting live from a bus shelter in the corner. Thank God bus shelters have Wi-Fi. No, he's in his beautiful big house that he bought in St. John's. Congratulations, Phil.
Well, there's nothing in it. But from what I've heard, I was quite comforted to hear that Paul McCartney sort of writes the music and then gets a bunch of words, like nonsense words, and then tries to find words that fit in, which is sort of the way I read it.
Yeah.
So that made me feel better.
The lyrics he goes through for Get Back, you kind of go, oh, thank God you didn't stick with that.
Oh, boy.
You should see some of the crap I write. So there you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, we'll wait till your documentary comes out. Then we'll know.
The myth.
Yeah. There's actually the other series that we mentioned before earlier in the episode, the Classic Albums Live series. I watched the Paul Simon Graceland one, and I think the Phil Collins in the Air Tonight. And the cool thing about those ones is that, again, you see the songwriting process. Like Paul Simon's actually talking about how he writes lyrics. Phil Collins is actually showing you the little markings on the paper that he went through when he wrote this song or whatever. Like it's pretty. Yeah,
and often they have the producers or someone at the board, and they go through the, they bring up the sliders and isolate vocals or bass tracks or things like that.
Yeah,
that's quite a
very
good
cool
series
as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of good music series.
Yeah, there's one which I can't remember what it's called now. But it's actually about the song by 10cc called I'm Not in Love.
Oh, yeah, that's on YouTube, and it's fantastic.
Really? It's an amazing piece of work, because actually all that sort of sound, it's not a mellotron, they're actually tape loops that they've played in, different notes that they played into a tape machine, and basically each note is on a fader of a mixer, and they sort of that's how they get the different chords, is by bringing out these notes on the fader. And just, what a huge success it was. And the fact, I think it's been played for, I don't know, like 10 years of total time on the air or something like that. It's
more tracks than Bohemian Rhapsody or something. The documentary is called I'm Not In Love, the story of 10cc.
And that's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and it's really worth watching. It's the whole, like, how the band formed and how the ups and downs, and it's very interesting. There's also, we could keep going on. There's one called This Is Pop. Now, there's a series on CTV in Canada, I think Sundays, a series called This Is Pop, and it takes you through, I think, 80s pop, or maybe 80s and 90s.
It's on XTC documentary?
There's also a documentary on XTC called This Is Pop, which is really good as well. So, so there you go. One title, both a series and a standalone film.
Okay. There's a lot of stuff. Go to YouTube, type in music documentary, and you'll have lots to watch. I watched an hour-long one on Oasis, and a band that I kind of like, and how honest they were about their love of the Beatles, and the fact that they, ripped them off all the time. And he was saying that during one album they were just listening to Revolver like constantly. Because he just loves the Beatles so much, and it's
very evident, yeah. Oh, and definitely to our listeners, please send us in suggestions of your favorite music documentaries too, and we'll mention that in upcoming shows.
That's true. Well, I think that's fascinating stuff. We could, if anyone has anything else to add before we wrap up tonight.
I'll let it go at that. There's lots more, but people can only listen for so long.
That's true.
Talking about documentaries being 15 minutes too long, I think this podcast is getting a bit long.
No, that's true. But of course, one of my favorite documentaries, and maybe it's not a documentary, but of course is All You Need Is Cash, The True Stories of the Runnels, which if you're a songwriter, you should listen to, because it's a work of art by itself.
We're going to have to put links to all of these on the show notes for everybody and for each other, because I'm curious to watch some of these ones now for sure.
Yeah, I'd like to do a show actually on All You Need Is Cash, because I think the way they sort of took Beatles songs and mashed them up is
okay. Right. Okay.
Well, we'll talk to our people and see if they'll allow that.
We'll talk to our people. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have tonight on Song Talk Radio. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, we want to hear from you, so send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. Stop by the website at songtalk.ca to find out past shows. And if you happen to be so inclined, why don't you stop by the next Songwriters Meetup. It happens monthly, 1 month on a Sunday, next month on a weekday. And it's free to join on meetup.com. Come to the site, songtalk.ca, for that information. And if you want to get more of Michael Proudfoot, how do you get more of you, Michael?
You can get a small bit more on Instagram at Proudfoot420.
How about you, Neil Stir?
neilmodi.com.
And of course, you can get more of me at philemery.ca. So stop by the website at songtalk.ca to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest. Thanks for listening, everyone, and see you next week or when we do this again.
Happy watching.
Good night. Good night.